You probably think your decisions are rational. But what if I told you that 25 invisible mental traps are steering your life without you even knowing it? From the way you scroll through social media to the choices you make about work or relationships, your brain is constantly being nudged in directions you don't fully notice. In this video, we'll explore the biases shaping your judgments, some practical and others that might feel spiritual, and give you clear ways to outsmart them. Let's start with one bias that hides in plain sight every time you open your feed. Confirmation bias. Why your social media feed is lying to you. At its core, confirmation bias is the tendency to pay more attention to information that supports what you already believe while ignoring or dismissing what challenges it. It feels natural in the moment because it makes your world seem consistent, as if reality lines up neatly with your opinions. Yet that comfort comes at a cost, because it shapes your view of reality into something narrower than it really is. What makes this bias even stronger today is the way social platforms are built. Algorithms don't just show you random content. They prioritize posts that keep you scrolling, clicking, and engaging. And what tends to pull your attention most are the things you already want to agree with. Over time, this repetition trains your feed into a steady flow of familiar beliefs, reinforcing assumptions while quietly filtering out opposing voices. Research on digital behavior shows that algorithmic personalization and group dynamics concentrate users into like-minded streams, creating modern filter bubbles and echo chambers where confirmation bias thrives. The consequences go well beyond entertainment preferences. One major effect is polarization. If your online environment continually reflects your own perspective, you begin to think that perspective is not just common but universal. Interactions with people outside that bubble then feel jarring or even hostile, not because their views are extreme, but because your exposure to them is so rare. Another effect is that everyday decisions become skewed. Whether you're considering career moves, financial strategies, or relationship choices, you end up relying only on evidence that affirms your assumptions, while other useful information gets ignored. Think of someone researching investment strategies. If they already believe one sector, like crypto or tech startups, is the only real path to wealth, they'll keep clicking articles and videos confirming that belief. The more they click, the more the algorithm shows them, creating the illusion that everyone agrees. Missing from their view are sober analyses of risk, failure rates, or alternative strategies that could save them from costly mistakes. The same dynamic appears in relationships. If you come in convinced your partner never really listens, you'll be drawn to posts or stories that highlight bad communication, reinforcing your frustration, while overlooking the times they genuinely showed care. The bias doesn't erase opposing information. What it does is make the confirming narrative so pervasive that alternative perspectives seem weaker or irrelevant by comparison. That's why two people can stand on the same news event and describe completely different realities. Each of them has been immersed in streams of content confirming what they already held true. Breaking the cycle takes intention. A simple action is to deliberately follow one or two creators whose views differ from yours, but who present their reasoning in thoughtful, respectful ways. You don't need to agree with them. The point is to widen the range of ideas you're absorbing, so your brain has material to test against, instead of drifting into passive agreement. Another practice is to ask yourself, do I believe this because the evidence is convincing, or just because I've encountered it many times? That pause creates space for reflection and reduces the automatic pull of confirmation bias. Algorithms don't hijack your critical thinking outright, but they nudge it toward comfort. If you always meet comfort with acceptance, you trade growth for familiarity. The good news is that once you notice this pattern, you regain some control. Knowing that your feed is designed to encourage bias, you can decide when to lean into it and when to step outside. Here's something to reflect on. What is one idea you now see endlessly repeated online simply because you clicked on it once? And if you were shown a different pattern of posts, how might your perspective look different today? Share your example in the comments. It's a revealing way to see how strong this bias has already become in your own feed. Learning to resist confirmation bias means choosing to base decisions on a fuller picture rather than a filtered one. That might involve reassessing how you interpret patterns in politics, how you structure your finances, or how you weigh long-term personal goals. Each time you catch your brain looking only for agreement, you give yourself a chance to step back and reconsider. And while this bias pulls you into repeating the same ideas until they feel proven, it's far from the only mental trap that works this way. Some biases don't rely on agreement at all. They trap you by clinging to the effort you've already spent. Sunk cost fallacy, the Netflix series you can't stop watching. You've probably had this experience. Sitting in front of a show that lost its spark hours ago, yet you keep pressing next episode because you've already invested so much time. That is the sunk cost fallacy at work. It persuades you to keep going, not because you're enjoying yourself, but because quitting feels like admitting the earlier effort was wasted. The show isn't delivering real value anymore, but your brain treats the past investment as if it guarantees future payoff. This same trap doesn't just apply to entertainment. People stay years in jobs they no longer enjoy, reminding themselves of the training, the projects, or the time they've invested. Instead of considering whether tomorrow promises anything better, they look backwards and treat old effort as a reason to continue. Relationships often follow the same pattern. Shared history gets mistaken for enough reason to stay, even when the future looks uncertain or unfulfilling. That's how past investment quietly disguises itself as obligation. Streaming culture makes this bias easy to spot. Entire evenings slip away not out of genuine enjoyment, but because continuing feels like the right thing to do after starting. The pattern is simple. Effort already spent becomes the justification for spending more. But here's the truth. Previous hours or years are already gone. They cannot be recovered. The only rational question is whether your next step, whether that's another episode, another year at work, or another push in a tired relationship, actually gives you meaningful value. Walking away feels harder than it should because our minds frame it as a waste. If you stop mid-season, it feels like all those earlier hours were for nothing. Yet the real waste is continuing with something that no longer brings benefit. The more you push forward under that illusion, the more you extend the loss. Finishing a series you dislike doesn't redeem the time, just as staying in a stagnant job doesn't make your unhappiness worth it. One option cuts the cost, and the other multiplies it. Research on work culture helps highlight how powerful this bias can be. Surveys of remote employees in recent years reveal high levels of burnout, with many reporting difficulty switching off due to constant accessibility and blurred boundaries. According to workplace consultants like Peninsula, this pattern traps workers into routines they no longer find sustainable, but they continue out of a sense of commitment to past achievements. Buffer's 2023 report showed that many workers now prefer hybrid or flexible arrangements, precisely to protect themselves from these cycles. These findings show how ongoing strain continues not because people expect tomorrow to improve, but because they feel bound to what they've already given. Think of the way people justify pouring hours into a poor series. They complain through every episode, yet insist they want to see how it ends. That's less about seeking enjoyment, and more about defending the earlier hours with additional hours. Closure seems like a reward, but genuine value is absent. The same dynamic occurs in careers or relationships. People push forward because they once started, not because staying still offers something worthwhile. Money sharpens the example. Imagine paying for a gym membership you rarely use. Each month the withdrawal stings, but instead of cancelling, you hesitate. You think about all the money wasted so far and decide to keep the subscription, as if continuing somehow redeems it. Yet the truth is the opposite. By keeping the membership, you guarantee losing more. The only way to stop the drain is to cut it off. But with sunk costs involved, logic takes a back seat to emotion. The fallacy thrives because emotions cloud our view of evidence. Emotion says, don't waste what you've already spent. Reason says, past investment doesn't matter if the outcome ahead isn't useful. That difference matters. The skill to practice is shifting your focus forward, away from the weight of old effort, and toward what can actually be gained. A useful exercise is to reset the frame. Pause and ask, if I hadn't started this already, would I still choose it today? For example, if you hadn't begun a series, would you start now knowing how bored you've been? If you hadn't worked 5 years at your current job, would you apply for it today under its current conditions? This deliberate thought experiment removes history from the equation and forces attention on present and future payoff. Often when people use this reset, the answer is a clear no. That response is not a failure, it's a guide. It means it's time to reallocate time, money, or energy towards something that aligns better with your goals. Quitting feels like loss in the short term, but in reality, it's a recovery. By refusing to let the past dictate your choices, you free up space for better opportunities. The hidden cost of clinging is bigger than wasted hours or money. It blocks you from alternatives you might actually value. Dragging yourself through a dull season means missing out on a fresh series that excites you. Staying in a dead-end relationship prevents you from building a healthier one. Holding on to a job you dislike for the sake of seniority prevents you from pursuing growth in a different role. The opportunity cost, what you miss because you are stuck defending the past, is often more damaging than the visible waste. Part of what makes the sunk cost fallacy so sticky is that it disguises itself as discipline. People associate persistence with resilience. They confuse refusal to quit with strength. But resilience isn't about never changing paths. It's about adapting when conditions shift. Pushing forward in something joyless and fruitless isn't strength. Real strength comes in cutting ties when continuation no longer makes sense, and investing your effort where the returns can actually grow. Once you recognize this bias, the path out becomes clearer, even if it isn't easy. Instead of defending what's gone, protect what remains. Refuse to frame leaving as wasting old effort. Instead, frame it as saving future effort. Ending a draining series isn't wasting 6 hours. It's recovering 6 more. Leaving a job that's stagnated isn't abandoning your career. It's creating room for opportunities that fit your direction now. This shift changes how you see quitting. It stops being abandonment and starts being agency. Each time you resist the pressure to continue just because of time or money already spent, you reclaim time and energy you can pour into better choices. That gain is not immediate in appearance, but over time it becomes obvious. It's not about what was already consumed. It's about what you preserve for the future. The sunk cost fallacy shows how past effort tricks us into defending it. But biases don't only distort decisions about effort. Some alter how we gauge danger itself, convincing us that rare but dramatic risks are more threatening than the real ones we face every day. Availability heuristic. Why you think plane crashes are common. Did you know many people still feel more uneasy stepping onto a plane than they do sliding behind the wheel of their car? That tension doesn't come from statistics. It comes from the availability heuristic, a shortcut your mind uses to judge risk based on how quickly examples surface in memory. When you picture travel dangers, it's not steady streams of minor fender benders that leap to mind. It's the rare but unforgettable image of a flaming aircraft dominating breaking news. Because those moments replay in our memory so clearly, they distort reality. Planes remain one of the safest ways to travel, but memory cues don't care about math. They care about what sticks. The process is simple. Instead of weighing actual likelihoods, the brain reaches for the easiest story it can recall. If that story feels vivid, we assume the danger is frequent. Car accidents happen every day, but rarely make headlines beyond local coverage, so they fade in background noise. Plane crashes, though rare, are presented with powerful images, survivor testimonies, and repetition across multiple outlets. That repetition cements itself in judgment, leading people to believe extraordinary risks are the ones most near. Social platforms magnify this skew. Algorithms thrive on attention-grabbing material, and dramatic events outperform everyday facts. A train derailment becomes a viral clip, a freak animal attack turns into a trending video, and an exotic disease inspires looping reaction posts. These events stay visible not because they're common, but because they attract clicks. Research shows platforms amplify high-intensity events, feeding into our natural bias for striking stories. As users, we come away with the sense that rare dangers surround us at every turn. This distortion seeps into choices large and small. Some people genuinely prefer to drive long distances rather than fly, convinced they're choosing a safer option. Yet statistically, driving substantially increases risk. The perception gap causes real behavior changes that actually move people toward more danger while making them feel more secure. The availability heuristic transforms a rare catastrophe into an everyday worry, while turning an ongoing risk into something invisible. Money decisions follow the same pattern. Spectacular news about sudden financial crashes, overnight crypto millionaires, or dramatic bankruptcies grabs attention online. Those extreme outcomes come to mind more readily than the quieter story of someone gradually losing wealth to inflation or long-term debt. The result is exaggerated fear of collapse or inflated optimism about jackpots, while moderate but more realistic risks go unnoticed. The drama drives the choice, but it rarely reflects the most probable outcome. You can see the same bias with health fears. Reports of rare diseases spread quickly online, especially when celebrities are involved. Meanwhile, widespread killers like high blood pressure, heart disease, or stress-related conditions show up less in the feed, despite affecting far more people. Since rare conditions flood memory with vivid stories, people allocate their worry toward freak scenarios rather than everyday threats to well-being. The real dangers linger quietly outside of attention. The availability heuristic even influences collective opinion. A high-profile crime incident recorded on a smartphone can travel across platforms and dominate conversations nationwide. Replay after replay builds a sense that crime levels must be surging, even when long-term crime data indicates no such rise. Public perception shifts toward urgency, policies get support based on impressions, and individuals adopt habits aimed at preventing risks that may not be increasing at all. The mind is not tallying numbers, it is replaying clips. It doesn't stop at public fears. In the workplace, managers often give disproportionate weight to a single dramatic failure, forgetting the majority of steady accomplishments. One missed deadline that required visible cleanup overshadows months of reliable contribution. That single memory comes to mind quickly in performance evaluations, driving judgment through what was emotionally loud instead of statistically balanced. In personal relationships, the effect is just as strong. A recent argument may drown out years of ordinary support, tilting evaluations toward the most available story rather than the actual ratio of experiences. Why does this shortcut hold such influence? Because memory isn't impartial storage. It's designed to retain emotional, striking, or unusual material. The brain records highlights for survival efficiency. If you had to sort through every moment with equal weight, decision-making would grind to a halt. So, it elevates reminders of danger, shock, and novelty. That efficiency, in turn, creates the quiet illusion that our memory is a representative sample of reality, when it is not. So what can you do when you feel yourself pulled into disproportionate fear? One way is to interrupt instinct with verification. When your gut spikes after a sensational story, pause and ask, am I reacting to frequency or to vividness? Then, check probabilities from reliable sources. This doesn't mean searching for comfort. It means reviewing actual data to see if the story matches the scale of risk. Often, reality proves less severe than impression suggests. By reconnecting to evidence, you shift back from reaction to reasoning. Another fix is to notice when decisions are powered by that one story I recall. If that's your foundation, treat it as incomplete evidence, not final truth. A quick thought check. Do I believe this because it's common, or because it's unforgettable? Create space for a comma response. You don't erase bias instantly, but you slow down its control. That pause is enough to prevent snap decisions driven by distorted memory. Here's a quick exercise. Recall the last news story that set off strong anxiety for you. Maybe it was a natural disaster, a violent event, or an unusual health scare. Ask yourself honestly, did that fear linger because you kept encountering the story, or because it represented a genuine daily threat? This reflection makes the bias visible in your own experience. Once you see the gap, you know how much of your judgment is being set by media emphasis rather than real odds. Ultimately, the availability heuristic doesn't mean you will always think wrongly. It means you will think disproportionately when memory shortcuts go unchecked. It rewards the fast, but not the balanced. Resisting it doesn't remove risk from life, but it reallocates your attention to the true scale of threats and opportunities. You worry less about plane crashes and more about routine driving safety. You stress less about overnight financial disasters and more about sustainable financial habits. Decisions become quieter and more accurate once highlight-driven thinking is balanced with verification. Awareness itself is protection. Each time you catch your mind leaping to the most vivid story, you remind yourself that vivid isn't the same as frequent. That reminder loosens the grip of shocking headlines and lets real probability guide choices again. It keeps judgment closer to the ground, so fear doesn't inflate rare dangers while ignoring the constant, mundane ones that genuinely shape your life. But while availability skews what dangers we expect, another bias shapes how we evaluate worth itself. Sometimes it's not memory that tricks us, but the very first number we see. Anchoring bias. How that first price tag tricks your brain. Picture this. You walk into a store, glance at a jacket priced at $600, and then notice another one nearby for $300. Suddenly, that second jacket feels like a bargain. But here's what's actually happening. Your brain has latched onto the first number as its measuring stick. Anchor equals the first number you see. Everything afterward is judged relative to it. The 300 still leaves your wallet lighter by 300. Yet beside the 600 anchor, the cost feels surprisingly justifiable. Anchoring bias works because the mind doesn't process value in isolation. It needs reference points. Marketers learned long ago that if you strike through an original price and replace it with a lower one, the new figure feels irresistibly better. Sneakers tagged at $80 might not seem cheap on their own, but compared to a crossed-out $150, they instantly feel like a steal. Nothing about the product changed. What changed was the frame, and the first number you encountered decided the frame. Today, this effect is amplified by personalization. Algorithms and AI can present different first prices, or anchors to different users based on browsing history, spending habits, or even how long you hesitate before buying. One shopper may see an inflated original price, designed to make a discount look generous, while another sees a different baseline for the very same item. Research on algorithmic personalization shows that platforms shift these numbers strategically, using your own digital footprint to decide what anchor will nudge you most effectively. The result? Each person walks away convinced they found a smart deal, when in reality, their perception of value was shaped by a personalized anchor they never questioned. This algorithm-driven anchoring makes noticing the bias harder than ever. In physical stores, you and your friends compared the same tags, but online, each of you may be presented with different anchors you can't compare against. The numbers shift silently, yet they guide what feels like rational evaluation. Anchoring doesn't force your hand, but it subtly tilts your choices, enough to influence how much you spend and what you think counts as a fair purchase. Take investments as another example. Many investors fixate on a past price peak, believing it's an accurate benchmark for a stock's true value. If a share once traded at $200 and now sits at $100, people assume it's a bargain, as though the market is bound to restore it. What they ignore are fundamentals, earnings, sector changes, or competitive shifts that might explain the dip. The anchor of that previous peak warps judgment, leading people to hold on when they shouldn't or to allocate money with misplaced confidence. Anchoring also alters high-stakes negotiations. Studies show that the very first figure stated in a discussion can sway the outcome dramatically, even when the figure is arbitrary or irrelevant. In real estate, an inflated asking price makes subsequent offers orbit around that anchor, giving sellers a stronger position than the property may merit. Salary negotiations follow the same pattern. The first number placed on the table, however unreasonable, sets the bounds of what feels acceptable. Even seasoned professionals fall prey to this influence, proof that expertise doesn't exempt anyone from the sway of an anchor. Consumers meet manipulated anchors constantly without realizing it. Think of a subscription service offering 3 tiers: basic, standard, and premium. The premium tier might be priced deliberately high, serving less as an option people choose, and more as a decoy that makes the standard tier feel affordable in comparison. The anchor isn't meant to be purchased. It's meant to reframe the tier you were always likely to pick. Similar tactics apply to bundled offers or compare at pricing. The anchor doesn't just sit there as information. It actively pushes you toward decisions that feel rational, but are guided by that first number. What's dangerous is how easily anchors replace independent judgment. People feel satisfied walking away from a purchase because they believe they outsmarted a deal, not realizing the anchor set the comparison for them in advance. That's why anchors persist across every domain: commerce, investments, negotiations, even social situations where one exaggerated claim sets the stage for how the rest of a conversation is interpreted. So what can you actually do about it? One step is reframing how you respond to that first number. Instead of allowing it to define worth, ask yourself, if I hadn't seen this anchor, how much would I think this was worth? Would these sneakers feel like a fair buy if they only ever showed as $80, with no inflated comparison? Would this stock seem promising if I judged it strictly on recent performance and forecasts, not past highs? That pause forces you to see the anchor as noise, not as the standard. A useful practical habit is to set your own anchor before you shop or negotiate. Decide on a number that reflects your budget, research, or priorities first. For instance, determine what you're realistically prepared to spend on a jacket before browsing, or define the salary range you genuinely accept before walking into a meeting. With your own anchor in place, you're less vulnerable to manipulated numbers presented first. In investment decisions, you can ground yourself with fundamentals like cash flow or long-term growth potential, anchoring to evidence rather than memory or marketing. This practice isn't about trying to expel anchors entirely, you can't stop your brain from creating them. It's about giving yourself a healthier reference point, so external anchors don't hold as much weight. When you set the first yardstick, you're no longer passively defined by someone else's. That small shift gives you room to judge based on value, not impression. Marketers and negotiators will always lean on anchoring. Algorithms will continue refining ways to personalize anchors to maximize their effect. But your advantage comes from awareness. The moment you anticipate the tactic, the anchor stops being invisible. That awareness turns what was once manipulation into just another piece of information, one you can challenge rather than obey. Anchoring remains present, but its control weakens as soon as you reframe it. Here's a simple exercise. Next time you're drawn to a sale, pause and cover the original price with your hand or finger. Then ask yourself, if I only saw this lower price alone, would I still consider it worthwhile? That test shows instantly how powerful the anchor has been on your judgment. By practicing this, you'll catch yourself in moments when the anchor is dragging you away from your own standards, and then reset your focus to what truly matters for your goals. Anchoring is subtle, but its reach is wide. It influences your shopping preferences, financial habits, and negotiations more than most people recognize. Yet every time you identify an anchor and compare against your own criteria instead, you pull back control. You shift from being guided by planted figures to making deliberate choices. That difference isn't theoretical. It directly saves money, time, and energy that would otherwise slip away unnoticed. But while anchors frame the way you measure value, another bias works on a more emotional level. It doesn't shift your focus with numbers so much as it grips you with fear, keeping people locked in patterns and situations long after they know they should move on. Loss aversion. Why you keep bad relationships and dead-end jobs. Why do people remain in places and connections that noticeably drain them? Whether it's clocking into a role they've outgrown or staying in a relationship that feels more exhausting than supportive, the answer often comes down to loss aversion. Human psychology magnifies the pain of potential loss far more than it values the promise of gain. The discomfort of giving something up, stability, years invested, or financial security, feels almost twice as heavy as the joy of improvement. Instead of focusing on possible benefits, the mind narrows in on everything that might be lost, creating resistance to change even when change could relieve suffering. Psychologists define loss aversion as a built-in imbalance between how we experience gain and how we experience loss. Finding a misplaced bill in your coat pocket feels good, but losing the same amount stings much more. This asymmetry between loss and gain is the central idea behind prospect theory, the brain's built-in avoid losing mode. What's important is that this bias is not limited to money. It shapes choices in careers, relationships, and daily living. People cling to roles and connections that no longer serve them, not because of clear present value, but because leaving feels like a confirmed negative. Work offers a prime example. Countless employees describe being locked into jobs that feel stagnant or even toxic. They admit the work no longer challenges them, that fulfillment has faded, yet they hesitate to leave. Why? Steady paychecks, familiar tasks, accrued benefits, or even a sense of professional identity feel at risk. The possibility of losing these elements overshadows the potential of meaningful growth. Instead of weighing stability against development rationally, the fear of loss tilts the entire scale. The immediate security of the familiar wins, at the cost of long-term opportunity. Relationships show the bias just as clearly. Individuals stuck in hostile or unfulfilling partnerships often stay rooted despite constant stress or conflict. Leaving feels like discarding shared history, years invested, or hard-earned collective identity. Rather than asking, what could a healthier life look like? The brain whispers, but think of everything you'd lose. The sunk cost of time already given folds neatly into loss aversion, making the idea of leaving unbearable. The trap is that staying guarantees even more years lost, but the mind struggles to frame the decision in future terms. Loss aversion works by making present pain appear acceptable compared to uncertain change. Someone exhausted by constant negativity tells themselves it's better than risking loneliness or instability. They confuse survival with value and endurance with justification. The danger is not that hardship goes unnoticed. It's that the fear of additional loss licenses its continuation. In that way, loss aversion creates its own defense system, masking stagnation as protection. Economists studying behavior have demonstrated this imbalance repeatedly. Tests reveal that individuals often demand more than twice the reward to take the same risk of money loss. It explains why people cling to bad investments for years, thinking the loss will reverse, or why lottery ticket excitement outruns rational savings plans. When extended to careers and relationships, the ratio explains why people tolerate years of malaise simply to hold on. The supposed safer choice seems like keeping what you have, but in reality, it often produces the greater long-term cost. The hidden price of loss aversion isn't just the misery of today, it's the opportunity cost of tomorrow. Remaining in a dead-end role doesn't simply mean one more year of stress. It shuts out the possibility of growth in new environments. Staying in a damaged relationship consumes emotional energy that could be spent nurturing stronger bonds. The unseen losses stack as potential chances never pursued. That weight is invisible in the moment, but looking back, it becomes clear that avoiding loss generated more loss than leaving ever would have. A common expression of this shows in the repeated phrase, "I can't throw away those years." Someone in a draining partnership looks back at a decade invested and can't imagine walking away. But this framing ignores the math. Leaving might mean acknowledging a decade gone. Staying risks stacking another. The attachment to what has been already lost ensures that more will follow. The illusion is that staying protects what belongs to the past. The truth is that staying sacrifices the future. The first step in countering loss aversion is learning to reframe the question. Instead of thinking, "What will I lose if I quit?" you can ask, "What might I gain if I move forward?" Replace, "I can't waste these years," with, "What kind of years do I want next?" This slight adjustment doesn't erase the sting of letting go, but it supplies a forward-facing frame that reveals opportunities hidden behind fear. And when framed this way, the choices often become clearer than they appeared at first. Shifting perspective immediately alters outcomes. Take an employee weighing whether to stay or leave. If the only lens is salary or title reduction, staying wins almost automatically. But if the measure is which path builds skills, promotes well-being, or unlocks future impact, suddenly the move forward is safer than the stagnant paycheck. The math didn't change. The emotional lens did. Anchoring decisions in future potential loosens loss aversion's pull. This bias cannot be shut off. It is a feature of the human mind. The key isn't elimination but awareness. Catching the moment when you justify misery as better than losing is the opening to test the logic. If staying costs more happiness than leaving would cost pain, which is the wiser calculation, consciously shifting to that frame reveals how much of the safety is an illusion created by loss aversion. When awareness drives action, the gains are clear. Leaving a job that drains motivation frees entire years to build towards something greater. Exiting an unhealthy relationship may open emotional space that allows healthier bonds and new opportunities. Moving past loss aversion doesn't guarantee instant peace, but it breaks the cycle of trading years away just to avoid a temporary sting. Facing small losses directly delivers larger gains that outweigh them with time. That's the double-edged trick of loss aversion. It convinces you that holding on equals safety, yet in doing so, it quietly extracts more from you than walking away ever would. The discomfort of leaving is sharp but brief. The weight of staying is dull but heavy, stretching far longer. Thinking in terms of tomorrow, rather than clinging to yesterday, shifts the balance. By asking not, "What do I stand to lose?" but "Does this choice serve my future?" you catch the bias at work. That reframe transforms the logic from defensive to expansive, away from fear toward possibility. And while loss aversion keeps many people fixed in place, an entirely different bias disrupts how we predict movement at all. Often, the obstacle to growth isn't fear of losing, but an overly optimistic view of time, convincing us that tasks will take less effort than they do in reality. The planning fallacy, why you're always late and broke. Have you ever been certain a task would take just a few hours, only to watch the entire day slip away? That recurring gap between expectation and reality is the planning fallacy. It's the bias that leads people to underestimate future time, effort, and costs, even when their own past experiences prove otherwise. Psychologists have repeatedly observed that people remain confident in optimistic timelines despite years of evidence that projects typically stretch longer. Memory tells them one thing, but hopeful prediction pushes them to believe the next attempt will somehow break the pattern. This bias shows up in countless ways. You plan a home project, expecting to wrap it up over the weekend, but materials take longer to prepare and details pile on. At work, a simple presentation gets scheduled as a 2-hour task, Yet it balloons into days of revising, formatting, and coordination. The result is predictable. The deadline misses, the budget overflows, and the optimistic plan dissolves into stress. Why does this pattern repeat? At the center is what psychologists describe as optimism bias. When imagining the future, people tend to build idealized scenarios where everything clicks into place. They picture their best selves working at top speed, distractions absent, and no complications in sight. In practice, reality brings delays: a sick child at home, a technical issue, or just fatigue. But estimates rarely factor in those interruptions. The flawed mental model is built on perfection, so costs and timelines collapse when daily obstacles eventually appear. The financial consequences can be just as severe. When projects last longer, they also demand more resources. Budgets based on rosy expectations quickly double as overlooked steps emerge. Renovations balloon with hidden fees, startup founders burn through cash reserves earlier than planned, and freelancers underquote clients, leaving themselves underpaid for the real hours required. Behind these failures isn't laziness. It's the human default of underestimating how much effort reality tends to require. The cycle of resolutions illustrates the personal toll. At the start of a year, people make plans that sound small and easy. 10 minutes of exercise, a short daily meditation, a new learning habit. But those 10 minutes require preparation, adjustments to schedule, mental energy, and follow through. Very quickly, the reality piles up, and the plan collapses under unacknowledged weight. The pattern feels like a lack of discipline, but in truth, it is often a miscalculation, an innocent undercount of what the task demands. Procrastination makes the fallacy worse. When someone thinks an essay will take them one evening, they push off starting until the day before the deadline. Hours later, exhaustion sets in, and the task isn't finished on time. What was misjudged as one smooth sprint turns into weeks of stress compressed into late nights. That stress then feeds a cycle of dread, hesitation, and more poor estimates next time. The brain convinces itself tasks will be quick, then sets itself up to suffer when they are not. History provides large-scale reminders too. Governments and corporations consistently underestimate timelines and budgets for massive projects. Buildings, bridges, and systems are planned with confidence, but rarely finish within the original numbers. Public programs overshoot spending by millions, and new technologies release years later than promised. The same psychology that derails personal projects scales up across industries. Decision-makers imagine best-case scenarios and ignore the certainty of obstacles. So how do you protect yourself from this trap? Awareness alone won't undo it. You need strategies that shift the frame. Here are 3 clear steps that research and practice have shown to be effective. First, base plans on evidence from the past, not guesses about the future. If similar tasks usually take you 3 hours, assuming the next one will take 1 is irrational. Track how long your projects actually demand and use that data as your baseline. This keeps schedules grounded in real history, not imagined efficiency. Second, create buffers. When you think something will take 4 hours, assign 8. Project managers often build in contingency time, not because they expect failure, but because they expect surprise. By allowing a margin of error from the start, you protect your deadlines and budgets from collapsing when the inevitable hiccups appear. Third, plan for interruptions explicitly. Don't assume flawless performance every day. Include time for breaks, questions, and mistakes. Accepting imperfection from the start reduces the disappointment and chaos that come when life intrudes. The benefits of applying these steps are bigger than productivity. They ease mental strain. Chronic underestimation fuels burnout. People sprint against impossible goals, then berate themselves when reality pushes back. Remote work studies in recent years highlight this, showing how pressure to hit unrealistic targets steepens stress and leads to disengagement. Realistic timelines, on the other hand, bring steadier pacing, lower anxiety, and greater follow-through. When schedules are achievable, motivation holds longer, and energy doesn't collapse from constant overextension. Consider the difference in outcomes. With optimistic timelines, you end up late, broke, or both. Promotions stall because deadlines were missed. Budgets sink because expenses weren't predicted. Habits fail because energy gets drained by unrealistic expectations. When you replace guesses with measured data and buffers, you finish more often, pay more accurately, and experience less pressure. The exact same effort yields better outcomes because your frame was honest from the start. Practical application doesn't require perfection. You will still misjudge sometimes. But the key lies in understanding your first instinct is likely wrong and correcting early. If you catch yourself saying, "This should take no time at all," that's the sign to pause and double-check. That pause is where planning shifts from fantasy toward reliability. Over time, the habit of correction becomes second nature, and the bias loses its grip. The planning fallacy thrives because optimism feels good at the start. But broken promises, wasted resources, and disappointment wait at the end of that path. Resisting it means trading brief excitement for steady consistency. The trade pays off every time. Time protected, money saved, and stress lowered. And while poor planning leaves us trapped in cycles of lateness and overspending, another bias pulls us in a different direction altogether. Sometimes it isn't faulty estimates that steer our choices, but the subtle influence of what everyone else around us appears to be doing. Social proof bias, following the crowd off a digital cliff. Why do people decide to download an app, buy a gadget, or even copy a lifestyle simply because everyone else appears to be doing it? That pull comes from social proof bias. It's the tendency to assume that what others choose must be the right option. Instead of carefully reasoning through a choice, the brain leans on the shortcut of group behavior. In evolutionary terms, this once made sense. If the entire tribe ran in one direction, survival often meant following without hesitation. But in the digital world, that same impulse can work against us. Online, what looks like consensus often isn't wisdom, it's amplification. Herd signals that once hinted at safety now just as often lead individuals toward poor or even harmful decisions. In today's digital economy, this bias is reinforced by platforms that thrive on collective behavior. Social media algorithms highlight what receives attention, so when content gains momentum, it multiplies across feeds until it feels inescapable. A trending product, viral challenge, or new service built on repetition quickly creates the impression that everyone is participating. That impression is powerful enough to trigger action. People scroll through endless appearances of a skincare tool or tech gadget and begin to feel they, too, should act. The product might have no special usefulness, but social proof shifts the perception. Popularity starts to look identical to quality. The danger is speed. A century ago, herd behavior might have meant rumors spreading slowly through a town. Now, flawed ideas replicate within hours. A gadget with poor construction may see huge demand after staged demonstrations flood timelines, leaving real customers to discover the shortcomings after purchase. By then, the decision was already made, not on independent evaluation, but on the perception that everyone else seems to be doing it. The rapid scale of digital imitation makes missteps grow faster than careful judgment. Financial schemes provide some of the clearest examples. Questionable investment programs, rushed exclusive courses, and dubious crypto projects often gain traction because they look popular. Promoters seed videos showing supposed early adopters basking in wealth or luxury. As the repetition builds, people scrolling past dozens of these clips mistake appearance for evidence. They assume so many could not be deceived at once. Yet this is the exact trap. The crowd becomes part of the illusion. By the time reality sets in, the bias has already steered thousands into loss. Influencer culture depends heavily on this reflex. In many cases, people don't judge expertise directly. They judge the symbols of mass validation. A polished Instagram grid, professional editing, or large follower counts create a borrowed aura of credibility. Viewers misread this polish as authority, buying products or advice because they conflate visibility with truth. Research on digital platforms confirms this. Social networks can amplify both accurate and false claims through the same mechanisms, nudging audiences into herd behavior regardless of substance. Simple markers of popularity replace critical evaluation. Fads are an even lighter, but still costly reminder. Consider how quickly novelty gadgets like fidget spinners or kitchen accessories became staple purchases. For most households, these items offered little long-term benefit. Yet their sheer presence in classrooms, offices, and online feeds created urgency. The thought process was rarely, "I need this." More often it was, "Everyone else has it." Once the novelty passed, piles of abandoned products remained. Social proof inflated demand, but the value never justified it. The power of this bias lies in how rational it feels in the moment. People assume that if many others are interested, there must be something worthwhile behind the trend. Reviews, downloads, likes, and comments all serve as cues we instinctively equate with reliability. The problem is that not all signals reflect genuine adoption. Reviews are subject to manipulation, downloads may come from temporary curiosity, and posts may be orchestrated through influencer campaigns. Yet the brain's shortcut turns those cues into trust. Evolution taught it that large numbers signal truth. The digital environment exploits that wiring. Algorithms add another distortion. What rises in your feed may reflect promotional spending, a campaign running quietly behind the scenes, or quirks in how recommendation systems favor specific content. Visibility becomes mistaken for consensus. A song, a brand, or an app doesn't always trend because millions found it naturally valuable. It trends because algorithmic choices put it in front of millions. But for the viewer, repetition itself convinces. It feels obvious that if it appears everywhere, it must be good. That gap between visibility and authenticity is where this bias misleads the most. So how can you defend against it? A first rule of thumb is simple. If your main reason for acting sounds like, everyone else is doing it, treat that as a warning. Pause and replace it with questions that center your own perspective. Ask, is this solving a real problem for me? Can I find reviews from sources not tied to the platform promoting it? Do I understand who benefits if I make this purchase or join this trend? This small mental checklist slows the automatic impulse and brings the evaluation back toward evidence and purpose. Noticing the habit itself changes the reaction. Once you recognize that desire is often linked to seeing something repeatedly rather than identifying a genuine need, the impression loses force. Mass participation stops looking like a guarantee of quality. Instead, it starts looking like a psychological nudge. The realization shifts. Everyone's doing it, from a justification into a red flag. At that moment, you stop drifting with the signals and begin using them as prompts to think critically. The reward of resisting this bias is freedom. You reclaim the ability to make choices that actually fit your personal goals and not ones dictated by trending cues. Social proof doesn't vanish, but its influence weakens. Consensus can still flag options worth exploring, but without becoming your only reasoning. That difference protects against wasted money, manipulative marketing, and false credibility markers. It also helps maintain authenticity. You act on what matters to you instead of reflexively chasing status defined by likes and shares. By building this resistance, you weaken the grip influencers, viral campaigns, and digital hype have on your decisions. They continue to broadcast, promote, and trend, but your filters prevent their momentum from changing your behavior automatically. The crowd still moves, but you aren't carried by it without thought. In a world designed to trigger herd impulses, the ability to pause, question, and decide independently becomes a powerful skill. Social proof will always exist. It's part of human nature to notice and respond to the crowd. What changes outcomes is your willingness to treat it as a signal to double-check rather than to comply. The survival value of following has shifted. It no longer shields you in the way it once did. In digital life, unthinking imitation often benefits platforms and sellers, not you. Asking questions about need, evidence, and purpose makes the difference between following blindly and choosing deliberately. Here's something to leave you with. Think of one purchase you made quickly because it seemed like everyone had it. Did you end up satisfied, or did the item gather dust? Type that impulse buy into the comments, and share why it didn't live up to expectation. Seeing these stories is a reminder of how common this bias is, and how valuable it can be to catch it before it repeats. Social proof bias builds on repetition and crowd signals, but it teaches a broader lesson. Not all cues your brain amplifies deserve extra weight. Sometimes the most recent or most visible information in front of you carries disproportionate power, and that can reshape your judgment in ways just as misleading as following a crowd. Recency bias. Why last week feels more important than last year. One way your brain can distort judgment is by exaggerating the significance of what just happened. This shortcut is known as recency bias. It occurs when newer events feel more meaningful than older ones, even if the older information reflects a fuller, more accurate picture. Instead of weighing both recent and past experiences evenly, the mind assigns greater importance to what's fresh in memory. Yesterday's news, last week's stumble, or last month's surge can dominate perception, steering decisions as though they represent the whole story. Take the business world as an example. Imagine a company with a record of steady profits through the year. If the most recent month shows an unusual dip, managers may interpret that single setback as a sign of crisis. even though the longer trend of consistent gains tells a different story. The one recent decline grabs attention not because it is more accurate, but because it is closest in time. That snapshot overshadows the broader pattern and pushes leaders towards short-term overreactions. Personal investments follow the same logic. Individual traders often abandon careful strategies after suffering a rough trading session. A single day of losses or gains begins to overshadow months of market performance, tempting them to rewrite entire plans around yesterday's noise. The reality is that long-term averages and historical data provide a much steadier guide. But when recency bias takes hold, the last 24 hours of movement feels like a glimpse into the future. In relationships, the bias is felt just as strongly. A couple might carry years of positive connection, yet one argument from the night before can loom large enough to feel defining. Friends, too, may discount years of loyalty because a recent misunderstanding or stretch of silence feels outsized. The freshness of conflict makes it appear disproportionately heavy, leaving older, consistent behavior harder to recall by comparison. Education and performance contexts reveal the same trap. A student who scores poorly on a single exam may begin to doubt their abilities entirely, even if their record shows growth and resilience. They feel as though the latest grade defines them, not because it truly does, but because it occupies the most immediate space in memory. The sting of the recent event distorts perspective, turning a single result into an outsized verdict on skill. Politics also bears the mark of recency bias. Years of steady governance may be pushed aside by a last-minute scandal or a dramatic headline during campaign season. Voters often overweight these newer stories, interpreting them as central to judgment, even when they don't represent the longer-term record. Freshness in time is confused with relevance, altering outcomes on the basis of the latest impression instead of the full arc of performance. Why does this happen? The mechanism is simple. Memories from recent events are easier to retrieve. They carry stronger emotional imprints and require less effort to recall. Because the brain values what is readily accessible, it interprets that ease of recall as a signal of importance. The trouble is that reality isn't evenly distributed over days or weeks. Real patterns emerge over longer stretches, but recency bias amplifies snapshots until they appear to define the whole. Financial decisions highlight how dangerous this shortcut can be. If a stock price takes a sudden hit on Monday, many assume the company is collapsing. If that stock rebounds quickly on Tuesday, overconfidence may return just as fast. In both cases, the short-term swing distorts judgment. The deeper record of performance is overlooked in favor of immediate noise. Recency bias magnifies volatility, creating cycles of fear and excitement that diverge from rational planning. Even everyday experiences are shaped by this pull. After a rough week at work, you might think your job has permanently soured, despite months of previous satisfaction. A few restless nights may convince you that you now face a major sleep problem, despite years of solid rest. Recent events create false generalizations, coloring decisions with exaggerated weight. The bias makes fleeting struggles appear foundational. What makes recency so persuasive is the emotional charge that new events carry. Their freshness strengthens the connection in memory, and with it, the belief that they must be highly relevant. Older experiences, though more reliable for assessing trends, fade in emotional intensity, leading them to feel less important. Judgment becomes distorted not because the fresh event is actually more true, but because it feels more vivid. Resisting recency bias requires one deliberate act: zooming out. If sales suddenly fall, executives should place the week's numbers beside the year's total performance. If investors panic after a single day's downturn, they should compare it against the multi-year averages of the market. By returning evaluation to a larger scale, the emotional magnification of the recent event diminishes. Recency bias makes today's storm feel like the whole weather report. Zooming out restores perspective. Relationships benefit from the same adjustment. When conflict erupts, it helps to weigh the disagreement against the years of kindness, effort, and trust in the bond. Doing so shifts focus from a sharp moment of negativity toward a balanced view of consistency, reducing the likelihood of rash conclusions. For students or professionals, one slip can be reframed by recognizing months of progress that remain intact. The broader view softens the intensity of a single stumble. Since recency bias thrives on speed, one of the strongest tools for countering it is slowing down. Before reacting, pause and ask, does this represent a genuine signal, or is it temporary noise? Mindfulness practices and psychological safety research highlight the same principle. By creating a habit of pausing before action and consulting longer trend lines or decision records, you reduce the grip of automatic distortion. This doesn't erase the weight of fresh memories, but it balances your judgment by anchoring it in more representative context. Technology pressures this bias further by fueling constant streams of updates. Headlines, push alerts, and trending posts continually highlight the newest event as though it is the most critical. Without conscious checks, you become conditioned to live in the short-term cycle, reacting as though each alert deserves immediate weight. The result is chronic reactivity, where decisions pivot around recent signals rather than long-term values. Protecting yourself means creating intentional breaks, resisting the urge to refresh for constant updates, and making time to review information that spans beyond the instantly visible. When you succeed in resisting recency bias, the benefits are clear. Decisions stabilize, patterns stand out, and panic diminishes. You begin to interpret events proportionally, seeing setbacks and gains for what they are, single data points in a much larger series. By grounding judgment in long-term evidence instead of snapshots, you give yourself a chance to respond with clarity rather than impulse. Recency bias may never disappear. It is part of how memory and attention work, but awareness weakens its effect. By practicing pauses, anchoring decisions in broader timelines, and reflecting on whether you are reacting to the noise or the signal, you reclaim perspective. Fresh events no longer dictate your choices outright. Instead, they become part of a larger evaluation, reducing the exaggeration that pulls outcomes off course. And while recency bias distorts by magnifying what is closest in time, another bias reshapes how we evaluate based on appearances. Attractive packaging, polished branding, or a charming personality can overshadow deeper flaws, convincing us that one appealing trait represents the whole picture. This next distortion reveals how easily first impressions can mislead judgment. The halo effect, when pretty packaging fools your logic. Why do so many decisions lean on first impressions rather than evidence? One powerful reason is the halo effect. This cognitive bias occurs when one attractive feature casts a glow over everything else, making you believe the whole product, person, or service is better than it really is. A clean logo, sleek design, or confident tone can dominate judgment before actual results are considered. You might feel your choice is rational, but in many cases, that choice is already decided the moment you encounter something pleasing on the surface. The halo effect works because people crave internal consistency. If the first trait they notice is positive, their minds prefer to assume the rest must be positive as well. If it looks good, it must also work well, becomes the shortcut. This once helped humans make quick calls under pressure. Fast judgment could save time and energy in uncertain environments. But in the modern economy, where companies deliberately craft image to manipulate impressions, the same shortcut is easily exploited. What was once a tool for efficiency now becomes a built-in vulnerability. A sharp, everyday example is shopping online. You scroll past skincare products, one in a sleek glass container with a modern logo, another in a plain bottle with generic labeling. Even without examining ingredients or reviews, many shoppers instinctively believe the stylish option must be higher quality. The truth is, packaging says little about what's inside, but the halo of design creates confidence where none is necessarily earned. Businesses know this well, which is why they devote large budgets to branding and photography. The first look often outweighs the fine print. In today's digital environment, the bias extends far beyond retail products. Online influencers often gain trust and authority, not through verified expertise, but through aesthetics. Polished editing, curated backdrops, and good camera quality make their advice appear credible. Fitness tips, financial advice, or lifestyle claims are accepted at face value because slick presentation mimics professionalism. Polished presentation often masks lack of expertise. Followers mistake charisma for competence, overlooking whether real knowledge supports the words. Technology platforms rely heavily on the same principle. Consider mobile apps or websites designed with glowing icons and smooth animations. The interface feels safe and intuitive, so users assume the underlying service is reliable. But the cosmetics don't guarantee fairness or transparency. Subscription traps, hidden fees, and invasive terms of service are easily disguised beneath the pleasant experience. The halo effect ensures many users never dig deeper. They equate beauty in design with honesty in practice. This bias also alters how people evaluate leadership and personality. A speaker with strong delivery can convince an audience to trust them, even if the content is shallow. A political candidate dressed sharply and speaking smoothly is often rated more competent than a rival who struggles with polish, regardless of actual policy strength. Once a first impression grips attention, the remaining evaluation is colored by that initial glow. To see it clearly, recall a simple scenario. You buy a bottle of wine because the label looks elegant, embossed in gold. At home, you find the taste is no different than a cheaper option. The packaging led you to expect quality that wasn't there. This is the halo effect distilled to a moment, equating style with substance. The damage isn't just wasted money, it's misplaced trust. When you believe recommendations because video quality looks professional, you follow the wrong voices. When you choose apps based on design rather than terms, you risk privacy or security. Even in personal connections, you may give unfair weight to those who look polished and underappreciate those who present plainly yet carry genuine ability. The halo effect doesn't stop at consumer decisions. It shapes who gets trust, time, and influence. It works so persuasively because the boundary between what I like and what works blurs naturally. Aesthetic preference spills into judgment without conscious control. Your brain doesn't file beauty and quality into separate categories once the impression is formed. It fuses them. Undoing this fusion requires deliberate effort. So what's the antidote? A simple two-step habit helps. First, ask for independent evidence of value. Second, verify credentials or product claims outside the platform or advertisement. For a skin serum, that might mean checking ingredient transparency and verified reviews. For a course, confirm the instructor's background from external sources rather than glossy video editing. For an app, look up independent audits or user reports instead of relying on its sleek onboarding screens. The key is creating separation between the surface and the substance. When you apply this discipline, decisions become sturdier. You can still enjoy aesthetics without being ruled by them. An elegant product remains pleasant to look at, but its packaging no longer tricks you into assuming superior performance. A smooth user interface remains easy to navigate, but your adoption of the service depends on whether it safeguards your data. You allow appearance to add value, but not to redefine it. The benefits extend to relationships and leadership evaluations. By recognizing when charisma is masking weak arguments, you avoid being persuaded by delivery at the expense of substance. By questioning the qualifications of an influencer beyond their online presence, you avoid granting undue influence to style. Detaching first impressions from total judgment doesn't mean ignoring presentation altogether. It means keeping it in its correct place, secondary. The wine bottle example captures the lesson in one glance. Style is marketing, not proof. Understanding that truth prevents the same trap across countless contexts. Courses, apps, products, even people. Surface appeal is not itself a measure of effectiveness or honesty. The halo effect thrives on inattention, collapsing quickly when tested with evidence. Over time, practicing resistance turns into skill. You notice when you feel swayed by packaging or polish. You remind yourself to check value independently. The halo effect might still spark a first impression, but it no longer holds control afterward. Instead of letting glow define the whole picture, you make the glow compete with facts. That difference saves money, time, and misdirected trust. Fewer impulse purchases pile up in your home. Fewer hollow promises slip through your judgment. Attention shifts toward what's verifiable, leaving less room for shallow appeal to dictate. Your awareness doesn't deny charm. It limits charm to the surface instead of allowing it to rule at the core. The halo effect demonstrates how easily appearances distort our logic, especially when environments are designed to showcase style as substance. But appearances are not the only trap. Sometimes what misleads you isn't the glow of beauty at all. It's the selective stories that platforms choose to highlight, showing only the rare winners while hiding the overwhelming majority of attempts that never succeed. Survivorship bias, the Instagram success stories you don't see. Open Instagram, and it looks like success is everywhere. Entrepreneurs showing profits, influencers thriving, and creators going viral. What's rarely visible are the thousands who tried and fell short. This is survivorship bias, focusing only on stories that survived while forgetting the far larger pool that did not. Behavioral research warns that seeing only winners skews perception, making effort appear like a guaranteed path to success, when in reality luck, timing, and external conditions often play decisive roles. To avoid distorted expectations, notice who is missing from the story. For every celebrated case, many remain invisible. Reflect on this. What's one success story you once believed was common, but later discovered was rare? Share it in the comments. It's often more revealing than the highlights themselves. Focus on realistic steps versus heroic outcomes. And while this bias hides failure behind polished wins, another illusion plays on sequence instead of survival, convincing us that a recent streak of outcomes signals momentum when none actually exists.